Today, inshallah, and we continue with the book of Guidance of the Traveler. Inshallah, next week and we will enter into the book of Al-Hafida in Aqidah. So there is only any for this month, and we have this slight any change. Um, we begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we pray that Allah bless us with istiqamah, seeking knowledge, and open our hearts in towards goodness in dunya and goodness in akhirah. Ameen ya rabbal alameen. So let us return to where we were in the beginning of the chapter of this particular book. So the author began by Kitab ṭahārah. So in our last lesson, we spoke about the definition of ṭahārah, and there are basically two aspects of this definition. Number one is raf'ul ḥadath, and number two is izalatun najas. And in just a quick revision of what we have covered in our last lesson. It is important that we be familiar with the Arabic terms. So we have raf'ul ḥadath and izalatun najas. So with regards to raf'ul ḥadath, it is removing the minor or major impurity. So we have this term ḥadath. An example will be when a person is not in a state of wudu. So we say that he is in a state of a minor ḥadath. He is in a state of minor ḥadath. If a person is in a state of junub, he is in a state of a major ḥadath. So ḥadath is something that we cannot see. So if a person is in a state where he does not have ablution, so when we say that he is in a state of ḥadath, this particular state can be removed by ablution. So when a person performs ablution, and this ablution will remove any the ḥadath. Likewise, when a person is in a state of junub, any meaning, like for example, if a person saw any sperm, for example, so he is in a state of we say in English a major ritual impurity. A good translation will be a major ritual impurity. Then this impurity or this any ḥadath can be removed by bathing. So we have the minor ritual impurity, we have the major ritual impurity. So this is the first part of the definition of ṭahārah, raf'ul ḥadath. And number two is izalatun najas. And izalatun najas, this particular chapter speaks about removing the najāsah, the filth. So in this particular chapter, we will study on what are the ways we need to remove filth, what are the uh, uh, means that we can remove any filth. So these are the two major components of the chapter of ṭahārah. The author began by speaking about water. So water is a means that we are able to remove the minor or major impurity from our bodies, and likewise water can be used to remove the filth. So water is what we say in Arabic as the wasila. Water is the means that we are able to purify ourselves, whether with regard to removing the ḥadath or removing the filth. So in our last lesson, we have covered to some many aspects about the rulings of water. So in short, we mentioned that the water we have the mutlaq, and we have any water that is pure but cannot purify. And water that is mutlaq is water that is pure and can purify. Water that is pure only, it means that water that cannot purify. And thirdly, we have filthy water, that is a mutanajjis. And then we also have the mushammas. So the author here also mentioned about the conditions of the mushammas, The mushammas any is water that has been placed any under the sun in a metallic any container in a place anywhere it is where it is hot, in a country that is hot. So we have covered the types any of water, and the author any mentioned that using the mushammas is makruh. So if a person has water that is hot, that has been placed under the sun for some time, and the water is in a metallic container, and it is in a country any that is hot, in a climate any that is hot in during summer, using any this water is makruh. And this is the view in the mazhab of Imam Shafi. And the reason why it's makruh, one aspect any of the reason why it is makruh is that uh, when water that is in a metallic in a container being placed under the sun for a long time, what will happen is that there will be a chemical reaction, and this can cause harm to the skin. So our scholars they mention that behind the reason of makruh, that there is a possibility of harm. And if you use this particular water, it can cause any harm to your skin. So this is based on their judgment, and we have any differences from with regard to this issue. So basically, we have these four types. Yani water that is mutlaq, water that is ṭahir, mutlaq, and also as what any sheikh mentioned here is ṭahirun fi nafsihi, mutahhirun li ghayrihi. Yani mutlaq is water that is pure in itself and can purify, whereas water that is only pure but cannot purify is the second type of water. And then we have the mutanajjis, yani water that is mixed with filth. And number four, we have water of mushammas. We also mentioned about the meaning of mutlaq. What is the meaning of mutlaq? So we say that mutlaq is water that is not binded. So I use the term binded. So for example, this water is mutlaq. Yani it is not binded to anything. The moment I mix any water with coffee, now it becomes muqayyad, and it is binded. So if I pour coffee inside this cup, so it will cause some changes in terms of the smell, changes in terms of the color, and also changes with regard to the taste. So now the water will change from mutlaq to muqayyad. Yani the water now it becomes coffee water. So now it is binded into coffee. So the moment water loses its mutlaq, then it is not permissible for us to use it for purification. So the only water that can be used for purification, as what the author mentioned here, is water that is mutlaq, that is not binded to anything. We also mentioned that natural water mutlaq, sea water is mutlaq, river water is mutlaq, because these are water that created from their natural origins. So let's move on to where we stop exactly. We have come into the part where the author mentioned وَإِذَا تَغَيَّرَ الْمَاءُ تَغَيُّرًا كَثِيرًا. So now the author is going to speak about the second category of water. And the second category of water is طَاهِرٌ فِي نَفْسِهِ. Yani it is pure in itself, but it cannot purify. So he gave the example of what? Yani when the characteristic of water changes. When the characteristic of water changes. So he said, وَإِذَا تَغَيَّرَ الْمَاءُ تَغَيُّرًا كَثِيرًا. Yani if the change that took place is a change that is a lot, كثيرا, بحيث يسلب عنه اسم الماء, to such an extent that you cannot say that this is water. So for example, if I just put a few droplets of coffee inside this cup, it will not cause much change. Maybe just a bit of color can be seen. Blackish color can be can be seen. So if you were to ask any the question, is this considered to be water or not water? The answer any will be, it is still any considered any water. Why? Because although coffee any has been mixed any into water, but it does not cause a significant change. So it is still any considered to be any water. So when does this water loses its mutlaq? When does this water becomes any binded? How much any of coffee do I need any to make any the water loses its color, its original color, and the taste and the smell? So if I put, for example, one spoonful any of coffee, for example, in this small cup, if I were to put any one spoon any of coffee into the small cup, what will happen? If you were to imagine one any spoonful any of coffee will create any a drastic change. It will create any drastic change. Now any the water becomes, for example, becomes any black in color. The water will become black in color. The water will taste any coffee. There will be a smell any of coffee. So in this any situation, yes, labu anhu ismal ma. This is what the author say. Yani it comes into a situation where you cannot call it water anymore. Because now it becomes what? It becomes coffee. It becomes any coffee. If I put a 3-in-1 coffee mix, and if, for example, inside any this water, and I stir it, and then I ask you this question, what is this? And everybody will say, this is coffee. This is not water. So the moment any that happens, now this particular water cannot be used for purification. This is where the author is going. So he said, وَإِذَا تَغَيَّرَ الْمَاءُ تَغَيُّرًا كَثِيرًا بِحَيْثُ يُسْلَبُ عَنْهُ اسم الماء يُسْلَبُ عَنْهُ اسم الماء. Yani it causes any drastic changes to such an extent that we cannot say that this is water anymore, because it has changed in its color, in its taste, and it is in its smell. So it is no longer considered to be water that is pure and can purify. بِمُخَالَطَةِ شَيْءٍ طَاهِرٍ يُمْكِنُ الصَّوْنُ عَنْهُ. Yani if this water is being mixed and with something that is pure and it is a mukhāliṭ. Yani we have a term here. It is called any mukhāliṭ. Basically in English and we say what? Mukhāliṭ is something that can dissolve any in water. An example of a mukhāliṭ is sugar. For example, if you put sugar inside water and you stir it, if you keep on stirring sugar in water, what happens to the sugar? The sugar will melt in the water. Correct or not? The sugar will melt in the water. This is the meaning of mukhāliṭ, and it comes in from the Arabic word khālata. Khālata meaning I need to mix. So there are certain substances that mixes with water. For example, we have sugar mixes with water, salt mixes with water. So anything that mixes with water is a mukhāliṭ. So here the author is saying, if you pour something of the mukhāliṭ, whether it is sugar or it is salt, if you pour it into water and it mixes with water, it mixes with the water, and it changes the properties of the water drastically to such an extent that you cannot say that this is water anymore. This is what he is saying. بِمُخَالَطَةِ شَيْءٍ طَاهِرٍ. Yani it is something that is pure, because now the author is going to speak about things that are pure that are mixed with water. He's not speaking about filth. Filth later he'll speak about. Now he's speaking about something that is pure, but it is a mukhāliṭ. Remember, we have this term mukhāliṭ. Yani it is something that can dissolve in water. So in the Arabic term, we have mukhāliṭ, and the opposite of mukhāliṭ, we have mujāwir. Just take note. He will speak about mujāwir after this. So when we say mukhāliṭ, meaning what? When we say mukhāliṭ, meaning it is something that mixes with water. Something that mixes with water. If we say mujāwir, mujāwir is something that does not mix with water. Yani if I put a stick in water, this is not mukhāliṭ. Can a stick mixes water? No. So what does a stick do? The stick enters into the water, and the stick does not dissolve in the water. So we say this is mujāwir, and it comes from the verb jāwara. Jāwara. So we have mukhāliṭ and mujāwir. So again, mukhāliṭ is something that mixes with water. Mujāwir is something that does not mix with water. So now the author is speaking about mukhāliṭ. Yani if something that is pure and it mixes with water and it change the properties of the water, تغيرا كثيرا, yani drastically, yani in a change where you cannot say this is water anymore because now it has been binded to something else. Then he mentioned يمكن الصون عنه, and you can protect this water from it. Yani if you speak about coffee, for example, I can protect water from entering coffee. I can protect any coffee from entering this water. But I purposely add any coffee into water. So in this situation, it is not any forgiven. Meaning, if somebody pour coffee into water, then the water becomes something that cannot any purify any anymore. Why is the author using this example that whether it can be protected or not protected? Because later on, he speak about situation where you cannot protect any water from changes. Sometimes it can be forgiven. That is why now he is saying that if it's in a state where it can be protected, meaning it is done intentionally. It is done intentionally. Somebody pours coffee into the water. Somebody pours salt into the water. It is done intentionally. Correct or not? It is done intentionally. It is not something that falls from the tree that mixes with water, or with regards to algae, for example, forming up. This is not something that is being placed inside. So in those situations, it is forgiven, which we'll discuss later on. So he said that it can be protected. Then he gave the example, قَدَقِيقٍ وَزَعْفَرَانٍ. Daqiq is flour. So if I pour flour into water, flour mixes with water. This is a form of, this is a mukhāliṭ. Or saffron. Za'faran is saffron. If I place saffron into water, it will cause changes into the water. And this is an example of mukhāliṭ. So flour is an example of mukhāliṭ. Saffron is also an example of mukhāliṭ. أو استعمل دون القلتين. So basically the author is saying that if that happens, then the water loses its mutlaq. The water loses its mutlaq. So if I pour any coffee into this water, it changes the state of the water. A change that is a lot. How do we know the change is a lot or not a lot? Change that is a lot, meaning if I ask the question, what is this? You say this is coffee. Then we say this is a drastic change. So what the example I gave earlier, if I pour a bit of coffee, for example, just a pinch of coffee into this water, and I ask you the question, what is this? You will say this water, because the change is minimal. When the change is minimal, it does not make the water in a state anywhere. It is not any mutlaq. The water is still mutlaq, if the change is minimal. But if the change is drastic, then we cannot name this as water. So this is how we ascertain whether it is a change that is a lot or a change that is minimal. So when does the water loses its mutlaq? It loses its mutlaq when the change is drastic. And this is changes with regard to something that can dissolve in water. Mukhāliṭ. The author gave the example of daqiq and za'faran, flour and saffron. So if the change is drastic, you cannot use for pollution. So this is the first thing. And then the second thing he said, أو استعمل دون القلتين في فرض ṭahārah. في فرض طهارة الحدث ولو للصبي. Before I go on, there is something that we have to know about water. Water is of two types with regard to its quantity. We have water that is a lot and water that is little. So water that is a lot is anything that is above 2 qullah. We have a term that is called qullatun. So qulla is about 220 liters. Some scholars mention up to 250 liters, about that range. So anything that is less than 2 qulla, for example, this water certainly is less than 2 qulla, because there's hadith of the Prophet ﷺ with regard to qulla. The Prophet ﷺ, when he mentioned, إِذَا بَلَغَ الْمَاءُ قُلَّتَيْنِ, when the water reaches 2 qulla, lam yahmilil khabath, that it will not carry filth. This is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where our scholars determine what is the meaning of qulla. So with regard to measurement, it is about an arm's length square. And if you take arm's length, 1 arm's length squarish, and 1 arm's length depth, that is about one qulla. That is the size of 2 qulla. If you have a container, a container that is one arm's length and is squarish, with the width of 1 arm's length and the depth of 1 arm's length. So that is roughly the meaning of 2 qulla. So how much water that can you that you can collect from that in a container. So that is considered to be a lot. That is considered to be water that is a lot. Anything that is less than 2 qulla is considered to be water that is little. Why do we make this differentiation? Because of the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned, إِذَا بَلَغَ الْمَاءُ قُلَّتَيْنِ لَمْ يَحْمِلِ الْخَبَثِ. Water, if it is a lot, if it reaches more than 2 qulla, it will not carry filth. Meaning, if a filth enters into the water, if it doesn't change the properties of the water can still be used for purification. But what happens if the water is less than 2 qulla? Then we have what is known in usul as mafhum mukhāliṭ. If the water is less than 2 qulla, meaning it cannot carry filth. Meaning any filth that enters into the water, automatically it makes the water filthy. The water becomes mutanajjis automatically, if the water is less than 2 qulla. But here the author is speaking about something that is pure. And he has not spoken about filthy water, which is coming. Now he is saying that if the water is less than 2 qulla, and somebody took ablution, and the use water from his ablution mixes into water that is less than 2 qulla. Now what happens to the water? Now we say then the water becomes musta'mal. For example, if I take ablution, and I put this cup in front of me like this, and I wash my face, the water that is used for washing in my face to remove the minor ritual impurity, the hadathul asrar, enters into this water, and this water is water that is little, less than 2 qulla. What happens to this water? We say that this water is no more mutlaq. This water loses its mutlaq. Why? Because it is mixed with water that is musta'mal, used water. And water that is musta'mal is water that is used to remove ḥadath, or water that is used to remove the filth. This is the meaning of water that is musta'mal. So here we have to pay attention a bit. See, do not be confused by the English term used water. And if I say, for example, used water, what can it mean? Used water meaning water that is used for anything. If I wash my hand with this water, if I wash my hand and I recollect this water, in the English term we say this is used water. But in the terms in your fiqh, musta'mal, this is not any musta'mal. Although it is used to wash my hands, but it is not considered to be musta'mal. Why? Because there is no ḥadath. I'm just washing my hands. I'm not removing any minor ritual impurity from my hands. Or I'm not removing any major ritual impurity from my hands. So it is still considered to be water that is pure, even though I wash my hands. But if I take ablution and I recollect my water of ablution into this cup, now it becomes musta'mal. Why? Because it is water that has been used to remove ḥadath. So do not any be confused with used water, yani the translation of used water for musta'mal in the English term. Because in English, whenever you say used water, it can be used any for anything. But in fiqh, when we say water that is used, yani water musta'mal, translation of musta'mal, it is used specifically for removing the hadath or removing any of the filth. It can be considered to be water that is musta'mal. So a simple example is what I mentioned. If I were to recollect my ablution, for example, this is my ablution. I wash any my face. I say nawaitu ada'a fardil wudu. Nawaitu ada'a fardil wudu. I make any the intention any of the obligation of wudu, and I wash any my face, and I recollect any this water. Tamam? I recollect. So this is musta'mal. Why any musta'mal? And because I have used any to remove hadath. So this particular water has been used. Has been used any for what? Has been used any to remove the minor ritual impurity that is on my face. That is on any my face. Right. Now I cannot reuse any of the water for purification. I cannot reuse the water for another wudu because this is considered to be musta'mal. And since it is less than tuqullah, less than tuqullah. If it is more than tuqullah, no issue. If I take any water, any from a swimming pool, right? And the water re-enters any the pool, it doesn't make any the water musta'mal. Why? Because any that this is a large amount of water. So whenever we speak about musta'mal, use water, in fiqh, we are speaking about water that is less than tuqullah. So in fiqh, and we say anything that is less than tuqullah, about less any than about 220 liters, we consider it any to be what? We consider it to be water that is little. So in fiqh, and when you say ma'un qalil, when our fuqaha and use any the word al-ma'ul qalil, yani it can be, this can be qalil, this cup and it can be qalil, and one pail also can be qalil. Although yani we say a pail of water can be a lot of water. But since any it has not reached any tuqullah, it is still considered to be water that is little. So he said, أو استعمل دون القلتين في فرض طهارة الحدث. يعني طهارة الحدث meaning I take ablution any for example. This is a طهارة الحدث. Yani I remove hadath any from my face by taking any ablution, and I recollect any the water. This is musta'mal. So now any this water cannot be used any for purification. Walau lisabiyin, even though it is a child that takes any the ablution. Yani a child and he takes wudu. A child and that has not reached puberty, for example. Yani he takes any ablution and we collect any the water of his ablution. Is this still considered to be used water, yani mustamal? Yes. It is still any considered to be used water. And it cannot be used any for purification. So regardless any whether the person any who takes any the ablution has reached any puberty or has not reached any puberty. Because some people any might be thinking that prayers any is only compulsory any for those any who have reached any puberty. So if those any who have reached any puberty, it is compulsory upon them to any to perform any prayers, then any wudu any is also any wajib. Then that's why when they take any ablution, the water any becomes any musta'mal. But as for a child, the prayer any is not compulsory any upon him. So if the prayer any is not any compulsory any upon him, wudu any is not compulsory upon him. If wudu is not compulsory upon him, then the water any might not be musta'mal. Some people might have that misunderstanding. So now any the water any mentioned walau li sabiyin. Yani even any if a child any takes any ablution and we collect any its wudu, it is still any considered to be musta'mal. Yani it is not any water that can purify. So this is why he mentioned awin najisi walau lam yataghayyar. Another any example and he gave if a filth and he enters into the water. So now, for example, and we have any this cup, tamam, and then one drop of urine falls into this cup. What happens? One drop any of urine and it falls into this cup. It does not change the properties of the water. When you look at the water, you don't see any traces of urine because it's very minimal. For example, can we use this water for ablution? Cannot. Now we we say this water is mutanajjis. It is filthy water. So regardless whether it change the properties of the water, it does not change the properties of the water. So with regard to filth, there is a different ruling than the mukhāliṭ, and that's what we mentioned, that is pure. The mukhāliṭ that is pure. There is a difference between urine and coffee. Coffee, if I add any coffee a bit, we see if it doesn't change the properties of the water, we say this is still water. I can still use any for pollution. But with regard to filth, no matter how much minimal the filth can be, if it enters into water that is less than 2 qullah, that is why the author here mentioned dun al-qullatain. Water that is less than 2 qullah, then it will make the water mutanajjis regardless the amount of filth that enters into the water. Walau lam yataghayyar, this is what the author mentioned, even though it doesn't change any in its properties. Lam yajuz at-ṭahāratu bihi. It is not any permissible for us to perform ṭahārah with it. So here the author mentioned how many things. The author speak about water that is pure but cannot purify. And the author speaks about water that is not pure and cannot purify. And with regard to water that is pure and cannot purify, it's divided into 2 categories. Number 1 is water that is mixed with something that is pure. Number 2 is water that is used to remove the ḥadath. So this is basically what the author is saying with regards to the types of water. Then he goes on to say wa in taghayyara bi-za'faran wa nahwihi yasiran. Yani if water changes with saffron. So now saffron, is it mukhāliṭ or mujāwir? Is saffron mukhāliṭ or mujāwir? It says saffron is mukhāliṭ. Yani how do you know something is mukhāliṭ mujāwir? Meaning if you mix this particular thing into water, if it mixes with water, it is mukhāliṭ. If it does not mix with water, it's mujāwir. So the author is saying if something like saffron, which is a mukhāliṭ, enters into water, and it changes the state of the water, but just a small change, a little change, then the water can still be used. That's what we mentioned just now with the example of coffee. And if little coffee enters into water, it does not cause a drastic change. The water can still be used for ṭahārah. So this is one example. The second one, he speaks about mujāwir. Mujāwir. Then he said, أو بمجاورة كعود ودهن مطيبين. So he gave the example of a stick. This is mujāwir. Yani if water is mixed with something that cannot mix with water, like on here meaning a stick. Yani if I put a stick in water, the stick does not mix with the water. So in this situation, the water is still mutlaq. The water is still considered to be mutlaq. Likewise, oil. Yani the author say waduhan. Duhan is oil. If I put oil into water, now if I ask the question, does oil mixes with water? The answer is no. And after some time, you will see the oil on top, and you can see a layer of oil formed. Oil doesn't mix with water. So oil takes the ruling of mujāwir, not mukhāliṭ. So here we have to differentiate whether a particular substance mixes with water, does not mix with water. If it mixes with water, it is mukhāliṭ. If it does not mix with water, it is still considered to be mujāwir, and mujāwir does not give effect on the water. So the author mentioned even though traces of perfume can be smelled. And for example, if you have a stick that has perfume, For example, some stick any from trees, like the oud any for example, if you put it into water, it doesn't mix any water, but what happens? There will be some smell. But this smell any is based on mujāwir, not mukhāliṭ, so it does not give effect. Even though there is any the smell, the water is still considered to be mutlaq. Why? Any because it comes any from a substance that is mujāwir and not mukhāliṭ. So this is when the author any mentioned, even though the stick or the oil has any smell any in it, and when it mixes any with water, there is any the smell, but this does not any make any the water not any mutlaq. The water is still considered to be mutlaq because the origin any of stick and oil, it is mujāwir and it is not mukhāliṭ. أو بما لا يمكن الصون عنه. The next one, any the author any mentioned that there are certain any situations where it is forgiven, where you cannot protect any water. So here he mentioned لا يمكن الصون عنه. You cannot any protect any the water, like what? كطهلب, algae. Yani for example, and if I have a pail of water and I put the pail of water at one corner of my house for 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, what happens? Algae will form. Algae will form any from the water. Where does the algae come? The algae comes any from the water itself. The algae comes any from the water itself. It is not something that has been mixed. So this is an example. We say that you cannot any protect any the water from the algae. You cannot protect any the water from the algae because it is formed within the water itself. So if the algae covers any the water, if the algae covers any the water and mixes any with the water, to such an extent it changes any the color any of the water, this is forgiven. Why is this forgiven? Because you cannot protect the water from it. So that is why earlier any we gave the example of coffee. I say coffee any is done intentionally. You can any protect any water any from coffee. You intentionally pour coffee inside any this water. So if that is the case, we say it changes the state any of the water, then it is not mutlaq. But in this particular situation, it is forgiven because in this situation, you cannot any protect the water from the example of the algae. So this is where the author and he gave this example. كَطُحْلُبٍ وَوَرَقٍ وَوَرَقِ شَجَرٍ تَنَاثَرَ. Another example and he gave is the leaves any of the tree. For example, if you have a pail of water and it is under a tree. After 1 year, for example, the leaves any of the tree falls any into the water and it changes the color any of the water. Is this forgiven or not forgiven? This is also forgiven. Right. Now anyway, we want to understand why is this forgiven? What is the similarity between algae and leaves falling any from the tree? What is the similarity? The similarity any is that you cannot any protect this. You cannot any protect. If you have an outdoor, for example, pool any of water, can you protect any the water any from the trees, from the leaves any that falls any from the trees? You cannot. You cannot do so. Likewise, any we got any to algae. Any after some time, many years, algae any is formed. Can you any protect any the water any from algae? You cannot do so. So if that is the case, Islam any give away out. This is something that is forgiven. This is something that is forgiven. The next one any say wabiturabin. If water is mixed any with soil, no matter how much any changes the state of the water, it is still considered to be mutlaq. Because soil any is part any of ṭahārah. Yani with regard to tayammum, for example, if you do not have water, we can use any the dust any from the soil. So our scholars any mentioned that soil has the origin of purification. So that is why if you mix soil any with water, it is still considered to be mutlaq. It is still considered to be mutlaq because soil is part any of purification. Watul al-muksi. Another example that we said it is forgiven is tulul muks. Yani, if water is kept any for a long time, what will happen? you will see some changes in the water, changes in terms of the taste, changes in terms of the color, changes in terms of the smell. This is forgiven. Since these changes is a result of being left for a long time. So this is also forgiven. The water can be used for purification. So these are the examples he gave. And then the next one he said, "Awistamila fi nafli." Yani if the water is used for the sunnahs in wudu, like matmada, yani gargling. For example, if I want to take ablution and I use this cup of water, I take a bit of water and I gargle and I pour it back inside. Is this mustamal? Is the water mustamal? Is the question. Again, the example is like this. I take part of the water, I gargle and I spit inside the water. The question is, can I still use the water for wudu? Can I use the water for wudu? I have used the water for gargling. And this water is gargling water. Water that has been used for gargling. Can I use this water for wudu? This is the question. The answer is yes. Because gargling is sunnah. So when gargling is sunnah, there is no ḥadath that has been lifted. When does the ḥadath in wudu lift? The beginning of the ḥadath is washing of the face, because this is the first obligation, not gargling. So gargling, washing of the palms in the beginning, tamam, these are the sunnahs. So if I were to recollect any water after washing my palms, recollect any water after my gargling, I can still use the water for washing any of my face in wudu, because since it is a sunnah, it does not lift any minor ritual impurity. And since it does not remove any minor ritual impurity, it is still considered to be mutlaq and not musta'mal. So when does it become any musta'mal? If it removes the ḥadath, as what I mentioned in the beginning. So this is where here the author says, "Awistamila fi nafli ka madmadatin," yani like gargling. Wa tashdidi wudu. All these things that we need to concentrate. Wa tashdidi wudu. Now, this example, the author is saying, now I have ablution. Imagine I have ablution. Now I have ablution. Tamam? And I take wudu another time. This is called tajdidul wudu. Tajdid. If I were to recollect my wudu, second wudu, tajdidul wudu, can I still use the water for ablution? The answer is yes. Like earlier, we mentioned that you cannot recollect your wudu, the water for your wudu. But now we say yes, and you can recollect your water for your wudu and use it again. That is if the case that you are doing tajdid al-wudu. Because the second wudu does not leave any ḥadath. Because your ḥadath has been removed by the first wudu. When I take my first ablution, I already remove the ḥadath from my body. When I take the second ablution, there is no more ḥadath to be removed. So the water that is collected after the second wudu is not musta'mal. It is still any mutlaq. So here it is important for us to understand the concept of water that is musta'mal. Tamam. So I'll just go on. We have a few more minutes. I will take in questions. I will take in questions. Anything that you don't understand, whatever I said, at any point, no issue. You can ask, no problem. And as what I mentioned, that this particular book is not really a beginner book. So the author expect that the one who studied this book and he has already known some of these terms. So that is why when I teach, I refer again to the terminologies. Refer again to the terminologies, because I know maybe some of you are beginners and you have not learned fiqh in the past. So that is why I take some time to explain certain terms, so it becomes clear, inshallah. So we just finish this a bit more. Then the author mentioned waruslin masnunin, yani sunnah bath. Sunnah bath, for example, the bath of Jum'ah. And a person wants to go to pray Jum'ah on Friday morning. And he makes the intention, nawaitul ghusla li'ada'i salatul Jum'ah, for example. Yani I make the intention, yani to bathe, to perform the Friday prayers. This is how we make the intention. The bathing, the bathing for Jum'ah, you must make intention to perform Friday prayers. Any bathing to perform Friday prayers, not any bathing for Friday. So bathing any for Friday prayers. So if I were to recollect any the water any for that I use any for bathing, and since this is a sunnah, is there any ḥadath that has been removed? No. This is a sunnah bath. So if I were to recollect any of the water, it is not considered to be musta'mal. It's still considered to be mutlaq. أو جمع المستعمل فبلغ قلتين. The next example, the author mentioned that if I were to collect all the water that is musta'mal and it reaches to qullah, it reaches to qullah. For example, this is musta'mal. If I have 200 cups of water, I mix into a pool. Now, since it is water that is a plenty, more than to qullah, now the water becomes any mutlaq. Even though the water initially was used any for removing the ḥadath any, for example. But since he has reached into qullah, now the water yani is considered to be mutlaq. Jazati ṭahāratu bihi. Yani all these examples that he mentioned before, it is permissible for us to do the purification. So now I will take in questions and inshallah ta'ala. All questions. I think I've answered now. Mm. Ah. We have a question here, which is not really related. Let me see. Mutlaq is on top there, is it? Okay. Okay, do you have a question here in your response whether the water from gargling being used for nose is permissible? You say this is allowed for its cleaning and it has not changed. There is no blood in it. Can I understand, is it because cleaning the nose is not obligatory since hence it is allowed to be used? Yes. The thing here is cleaning the nose is not wajib. It's not part of the integral in wudu. So when it is not part of the integral of wudu, it does not remove any form of ḥadath. So when it does not remove any form of ḥadath, water is not considered to be musta'mal. Because the definition of water that is musta'mal is water that has been used for ḥadath. Aywa. It seems to me that when it has been used to clean the mouth or it has become musta'mal. No. Yani, if the water has been used to clean the mouth, it is not considered to be musta'mal because gargling, as what I mentioned earlier, is not wajib. It is a sunnah. Or is it not any musta'mal? Seeking a clarification. I hope it's clear, inshallah. There's another tadi. Okay. Assalamualaikum. Waalaikumsalam. You mentioned in your response that as the swimming pool water has not changed in its characteristic when najis goes into it because it's large size and it can use for ṭahārah. Yes, that's what we mentioned. Because water reaches to qullah, swimming pool, and it's more than to qullah. So even a filth person urine inside, if it does not change the state of the water, it's still mutlaq. But it seems to me that the characteristics of the swimming pool water itself is not like normal water. It has changed as you can taste any of the water. You see, this is a different situation. Because water, swimming pool water differs any from one swimming pool to another swimming pool. So if you happen to go to a particular swimming pool, the chlorine is a lot, then we have to access the amount. If it is a little, we say it is still considered to be mutlaq. But if the change is drastic, if the change is drastic with chemicals, for example, then it cannot be mutlaq. So it depends on the type the type of the water. The example I give why I mentioned swimming pool because of the size of the water. Where we regard any to swimming pool, certainly it's more than 2 qullah. And the water is mutlaq as long as the change is not drastic. The change is not drastic, but minor changes, no issue. Minor changes, no issue. A bit of chlorine, no issue. So usually chlorine does not really affect any swimming pool because usually it is not much. It is not something that is drastic. Can I understand why it is still considered mutlaq? That's what I mentioned, because it is a plenty. Because it is a plenty. Is it true that a woman is not allowed to travel alone? So as long as she is accompanied by her mahram. Yes, and we have hadith pertaining to this. It is not permissible for a woman to travel alone except by the mahram. If so, is it permissible for her to go on her umrah, hajj alone without her mahram? With regard to going to hajj and umrah, usually people go in groups. So if she goes with a group, then it is permissible. Then it is permissible because the reason why it's haram because of safety. Why the Prophet ﷺ, for example, say that it is not permissible for a woman to travel by herself. One of the reason is because of safety. Usually, especially last time, for example, if a woman wants to travel alone, it's very dangerous. So there is a possibility that she might get kidnapped. There is a possibility she might get hurt. There is many possibilities. But some people, for example, today says that, but now today's situation is different. Everything, mashallah, airports are good and so on. But at the same time, also we have any other issues also. At the same time, also we have other issues and certain places might not be safe. Even inside the aeroplane, for example, the seats are mixed with men and women. The possibility of committing something that is haram is there. And likewise, certain places can be dangerous for a woman to travel alone. Even in countries like the US, countries like Europe. So this particular thing is still applied. Assalamualaikum, waalaikumsalam. If a person is in a state of major impurity, ḥadath besar, immerses his entire body in a tub. Actually, this is coming. The author will speak about this. Will that be sufficient for mandatory ghusl and considered as fulfilling the obligations of ghusl? So the question is asking that if a person immerses the entire body in a bathtub, it can be valid if the intention is made once it's inside the water. Yani if a person, for example, enters into the water and then he make the intention of removing the major ritual impurity, then the bathing is valid. Because if he enters into the water, the moment he goes out of the water becomes musta'mal. Yani if a person enters into the bathtub, makes the intention of bathing the obligatory bath, and once he exits the water, what happens to the water? The water becomes musta'mal upon the separation of the body from the water. So that is why the way to bathe in the bathtub is that you immerse yourself in the water, then you make intention. Yani to save yourself from musta'mal. Assalamualaikum, waalaikumsalam. If a person has just completed a massage session and his body is still covered with massage oil, then he performs wudu. Will the wudu be valid? It depends how much oil is on the body. As long as water can reach the skin. As long as water can reach the skin. So for example, if you have oil on your skin. You have oil on your skin. If you do this, for example, if you do like this, If there is no traces any of oil any that can be attained any by you doing this, then there is no issue. Yani, even though there are traces of oil now, tamam, there's traces of oil, but this is minimal. How do you know this is minimal? If you do this, yani, if you cannot get any oil any by doing this, then this shows any that the oil in is minimal. Then you can take any ablution by washing any dead body part. But it happens, if it happens any that if you do this, you can collect any oil, and for example, it means any there's a lot of oil. So now it is not valid until any you remove any the oil any from your body. So with regard any to oil, it depends any on the situation. How much any is the oil? Huh? Vaseline, same thing. Vaseline, if a person puts any Vaseline, then if you do this, you see, if you put a lot of Vaseline, if you do this, you can collect Vaseline. Now, meaning water cannot reach the skin because this is a lot. So you have to remove. And first, maybe you use a tissue or something, remove any of the oil, and then wash it first. Before you take ablution, just wash it. Now, khalas. Yani, even though there are traces any of oil, but this is minimal. Meaning water can reach any the any the skin. So this is how any we differentiate any with regards any to oil. Question is asking, Assalamualaikum. Walaikum salam. Is new water in Singapore tahir wa mutahir? Yes. New water and is tahir mutahir and it is mutlaq. Even though it comes in from najis, but because it has been purified and the characteristics or the properties in your water is there and it has been mixed into more water that's more than 2 based on the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, balagha al-ma'u qullatayn lam yahmil al-khabas, that's what we mentioned, then the water is still considered to be pure and can purify. So with regard to new water, do not be was. Because I think by now all water in Singapore are pure new water. If tajdeedul wudu doesn't leave ḥadath, is the niyat different? Do we still intend to leave ḥadath, or is there another niyat? Yani, when you take any wudu any the second time, and now you have any ablution. So the way any that you intend when you renew any your wudu, you make any the intention of tajdeed, that I make the intention to renew any my wudu. You don't make the intention to remove a hadath, and you don't any make the intention of obligatory wudu. So the way any you make your intention is I intend to renew my ablution for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is called tajdeedul wudu, and this does not remove the hadath, and the water is not considered to be musta'mal. That's what we mentioned. Next question. So the example of new water is similar to a lot water being gathered and allowed to be used for wudu. Yes, new water is permissible for you to use it for ablution. If you talk about new water in Singapore, especially. Now, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi. How do we take wudu the best way so that the nur will be on the brightest when our Prophet ﷺ identify us? Yani the way is to follow the sunnah, which is coming. And now we are only speaking about the obligation, but there are many sunnahs in wudu. There's about 150 sunnahs in wudu. 150. So that will make a big difference in a person who follows any of the sunnah and a person who does not follow the sunnah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. How about when we perform wudu using a basin and we have to scoop the water to pour and spread over our hands? All these are coming actually. This is called istiraf. How then do we be mindful about making the water musta'mal? All these are coming, inshallah, next week. If you read your book, Umdatusaalik, The Lines of the Traveler, the author and he will speak about this. Exactly after where we stop. He said, "Walau adkhala mutawaddi'un yadahu ba'da ghusli wajhi." Just I need to demonstrate any. If you are taking water from a pail of water which is a little. So when you want to wash any your face, make sure that the pail is not directly below you. Because what happens if you wash any your face and you make the intention of wudu and the water enters into the pail, now all of the water in the pail becomes any musta'mal. You cannot use the water for ablution. So this is common sense. What must you do then? Yani, you have any to put any the water by your side. Correct or not? Yani, you take the water like this, and then when you wash and you make sure you wash any as a place any that is not directly under the pail. But with regard any to washing of the hands, it's a bit complicated. I think we will speak any about inshallah next week. We'll enter into this because there is a way on how any we wash any our hands any washing of the hands in the mazhab of Imam Shafi has some ruling any in it. What is this? Solid. Fine. Of that. Like parents to hide to kids. How is it? I don't quite understand. There's a question here. Question asks about Ruqya. Yani, question is there's a question asking any about can we use if I can uh, asking any about the water that is used for wudu, yani to treat any ruqya. You see the thing about water that is used any for wudu, it can be used any for shifa. It can be used any for shifa. And the dalil is see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he takes any ablution, the Sahaba they race with one another to get any the water. So the water that comes any from any ablution is water any that contains water that contains any shifa, especially if the person any who takes any the ablution is a person who is from the salihin, from the salihin. And this particular water can be used to treat any diseases. And one any of the type of disease is ruqya. Ruqya here meaning what? Yani if a person is afflicted by the jinn, for example, it can be used any as a form of medicine. Now, this is used any by some people. It is permissible. Mm. Betul lah. So inshallah ta'ala we stop here and we'll continue. There's the last question. Is it better to invalidate a wudu or just perform tajdidul wudu? Tajdidul wudu is better because it's sunnah. It is not a sunnah to invalidate your wudu, but it is a sunnah to renew your wudu. It is a sunnah you need to renew your wudu. I will speak any about tajdidul wudu inshallah next week. Remind me. There are certain things that we need to know about tajdidul wudu also. There is a hadith in the Sahih Bukhari mentioned sunnah you need to drink any the water in your wudu. Does this mean drinking the mustamal water? No. You see, if I were to take ablution any with this cup any of water, for example, the balance any of the water, and if there is balance, this sunnah any for me to drink. The sunnah any for me to drink, not any the water that is collected. Wallahu a'lam bis-shawab. ربنا تقبل دعانا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم واختم بصالحات أعمالنا وآجلنا الله يكرم بفضل سبحان ربك بالعزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. تقبل الله منكم